Canada is not open to us. They need to open their market. Unless they're willing to open their market, they're going to pay a tariff.
Of Canada's economy. Of course, the federal government is getting down to the wire in trade negotiations with the U.S.
And softwood may actually...
Canada is not open to us. They need to open their market. Unless they're willing to open their market, they're going to pay a tariff of Canada's economy. Of course, the federal government is getting down to the wire in trade negotiations with the U.S. Iron softwood may actually be one of those opportunities for us to strike an early deal with the American. Trade talks between Canada and the United States have entered their most critical stage yet. With President Trump's August 1st deadline fast approaching, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick made it clear unless Canada opens its market, tariffs will hit. But Ottawa isn't folding. Prime Minister Mark Carney is now meeting with U.S. senators and provincial premiers to find a narrow path forward. A full rollback of tariffs is no longer expected. Instead, Canada is pushing for a limited sector-based deal, one that avoids broad economic damage and restores predictability, even if some tariffs remain. They want to ensure that they're able to provide high-quality, low-cost building materials for Americans. Also, it's a recognition that in this reality that we're in with this president, we got to put some things on the table to have conversations. In the midst of this, one old issue is taking on new significance: softwood lumber. British Columbia has faced US duties on softwood for years. But now, for the first time, Canadian officials, including Premier David Icke, are publicly signaling openness to export quotas as part of a deal. This marks a shift. Quotas were previously off the table. But with over $7 billion in softwood tariffs currently held in escrow and trade talks hanging by a thread, Canadian lumber is being positioned as a strategic bargaining chip, not just a casualty of US protectionism. Why now? Because softwood could offer a rare quick win. It's a sector with high visibility, cross-border interdependence, and enough political weight on both sides to create leverage without touching more sensitive industries like dairy or autos. Look, we got to be honest with ourselves as Canadians, and I think the Carney government has done a good job at this in its early days. This is Trump's strategy, right? Exactly what you just described. That's what his sort of mo has been in Trump 2.0 administration. But the game Canada is playing is anything but straightforward. Trump's trade strategy has been deliberately chaotic, shifting deadlines, unclear demands, and threats of full renegotiation of USMCA in 2026. His pattern of destabilization forces other governments to react, not plan. Former New Brunswick Premier Brian Gallant, who once sat at the Premier's table, described Trump's approach as engineered confusion. And Canada this time is refusing to be baited. Carney's government isn't matching chaos with chaos. It's choosing discipline, listening to provinces, aligning federal priorities, and pursuing options outside the North American orbit. Canada's response is quiet but coordinated. Ontario defends its auto sector. British Columbia brings softwood to the table. Quebec wants time-bound clarity. Despite differences, premiers are presenting a united front. At the national level, Canada is reinforcing its foundation. Bill C-5 aims to break internal trade barriers. The Major Projects Bill prioritizes infrastructure, energy, and mining, especially with Indigenous partnership. Externally, Canada is expanding its reach. From stronger ties with Mexico and the EU to renewed talks with G7 allies, the message is clear: Canada won't rely solely on Washington. Trump may still push forward with tariffs, but the cost is starting to show, not just for Canada, but for the US as well. Softwood lumber duties have already raised construction costs across the US, particularly in housing markets dependent on Canadian imports. American lawmakers are under pressure. A bipartisan delegation of senators is now in Ottawa, not to threaten, but to preserve economic stability. And the longer the standoff continues, the more Canadian industries accelerate their pivot away from US dependency. That's the paradox. The harder Trump pushes, the more self-reliant and strategic Canada becomes. This isn't just a trade dispute. It's a stress test for policy, diplomacy, and national cohesion. Softwood lumber might not look like much, but in this moment, it represents something bigger: the ability of a country to hold its ground, make smart concessions, and defend its sovereignty without shouting. Trump's tariffs may yet land. But if they do, the blowback won't just be felt in Ottawa. It'll echo across American construction sites, congressional offices, and investor portfolios. And in the end, it may be Canada's quiet resolve, not Washington's volume, that shapes the deal. They call it pink gold. Potash is a vital ingredient for growing food and Canada's production volume. It's now being touted as a secret weapon in this trade war with the United States. The countdown is on. Canada and the United States are deep in trade talks, facing a hard deadline, August 1st Street. If no deal is reached, President Trump has vowed to impose a sweeping 35% tariff on Canadian imports. It's not just a threat. It's already been formalized in writing. Behind closed doors, Prime Minister Mark Carney is walking a tightrope. On one side, Canada's economy still heavily tied to the US market. On the other, a US president who's turned tariffs into a political weapon. Carney's strategy has been quiet but deliberate. He's paused Canada's digital services tax, offered symbolic defense cooperation through the US Missile Shield program, and tried to avoid any public confrontation. But now many in Canada believe that's not enough. They say it's time to put real pressure on Trump. And one word keeps coming up: potash. Gulf Islands MP Elizabeth May is calling on Carney to continue collecting the digital sales tax. She's also pitching stopping the $4.9 billion exportation of Canadian potash, a key ingredient for fertilizer to American farmers. Potash is a key ingredient in fertilizer. Without it, global food production would shrink dramatically. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, over 50% of the world's food supply depends on fertilizers, and potash provides the potassium that makes them effective. Canada holds the largest reserves of potash on the planet, with most production centered in Saskatchewan. The United States, by contrast, produced only around 400,000 metric tons of potash in 2023 while consuming more than 5.3 million tons. The numbers speak for themselves. The US depends on Canadian potash. That makes it different from other traded goods. Cars, aluminum, even semiconductors can be sourced elsewhere. But with Russia and Belarus, the two other major global suppliers, facing sanctions or instability, Canada is essentially the only reliable source left. Any disruption could push fertilizer prices up, and with it, the cost of food across North America. That's why some Canadian leaders are calling for action. They want the federal government to put potash on the negotiating table, not just as a commodity, but as a bargaining chip. One proposal includes halting the $4.9 billion in potash exports to the US entirely. Another suggests creating a national strategic reserve supported by public investment through bonds. An idea costed by Canada's Parliamentary Budget Office during the 2025 federal election. Their logic is simple. If Trump is using pain as leverage, Canada should do the same. And if that pain touches US farmers, one of Trump's most loyal constituencies, it may force a recalibration in Washington. But the simple logic is, if the price of the fertilizer goes up that much, food prices, everything goes up, and yeah, it's food. There's a risk in weaponizing potash. It's not just another industrial input. It's tied directly to food supply, inflation, and food security. Disrupting potash shipments could hurt not only US farmers but ripple through the global economy. Industry leaders in Saskatchewan warn that tariffs and trade barriers on potash are different. Unlike cars or steel, potash is not optional. It's essential. That's why some argue Canada doesn't need to issue threats. The numbers alone, the dependency, the market imbalance, are powerful enough. The mere possibility of disruption may be all the leverage Canada needs. Trump thrives on confrontation. He pushes hard, expecting others to blink. But this time, he may have met a different kind of resistance. Not loud, not angry, but strategic. Potash isn't just Canada's economic strength. It's America's agricultural lifeline. Whether Canada uses it openly or quietly, it may be the one card strong enough to bring Trump back to the table, not with bluster, but with a deal. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says a proposal for a new oil pipeline in Canada is highly likely. Look, the bottom line is a new east-west coast pipeline in Canada is good for Canadians. It's good for world markets in that we have access to more supply. But for the first time, Canadian liquefied natural gas is heading overseas. As President Trump ramps up tariffs against Canada, Ottawa is responding not with speeches or countermeasures, but with something far more strategic. For the first time, Canadian LNG is being shipped directly to Asia, bypassing the United States entirely. At the same time, a new cross-country pipeline is being fast-tracked. It's not retaliation, it's leverage, and it could reshape the balance of power in North America's energy and trade relationship.